So good evening. Welcome to ArtScapades at the Norwalk Public Library. Today, the topic is American Impressionism from France to Our Shores. In this lecture, our ArtScapades presenters explain how the Impressionist movement arrived in America, including the influence of art dealers, the education of American artists in Europe, and the formation of art colonies. So I will now turn this over to Jody for the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Cindy. Hold on one second. Let me get myself organized. Okay, if I did this all right. Okay, I think we're good. So of course, I want to thank Cindy and the Norwalk Library for having us. Thank you to all of you joining us. There's people that'll keep coming in. I want to thank everyone for coming to their devices today. I don't know what you're on, if you're on phones and laptops and iPads, but thank you for coming. A big thank you to my partner, Robin Hoffman. As you saw, Robin is on putting these lectures together. Truly is a team effort, and we take turns sharing them with you over Zoom. So if you have any questions or comments, please use the chat button that's on your screen. Robin will be monitoring that chat box, and will actually be answering questions as the lecture progresses. And we'll also be able to all go back together and talk after I'm done. So tonight's topic, as Cindy said, is American Impressionism, and we're going to share with you how Impressionism moved over from France and was translated in America, specifically with what was happening here on the Eastern Seaboard. So in a brief timeline, we're going to look at where Impressionism, in this case, I've got French Impressionism up there, that fits in with surrounding periods in art. And we always remind you that our dates are approximations, as periods in art are fluid and often overlap. Impressionism, which spanned about 40 years in France from 1860 to about 1900, was preceded by Neoclassicism, Romanticism, and Realism, and it was followed by and overlapped with Post-Impressionism. And now American Impressionism, which is tonight's focus, actually followed French Impressionism starting in the 1890s. Major exhibitions of French Impressionist works in Boston and New York in the 1880s introduced the style to the American public, and artists here began to work in it. So with these dates in mind, let's look at a short background on how French Impressionism moved across that gigantic pond, and then we'll look at our artists. So American artists studying in Paris in the 1870s initially ignored Impressionism, the movement which came from the title of this Monet work. The few who took note of the radical style were repelled by it. After visiting the third French Impressionist exhibition in Paris in the spring of 1877, J. Alden Weir, who we'll be talking about later, wrote to his parents, "I never in my life saw more horrible things. They do not observe drawing nor form, but give you an impression of what they call nature. It was worse than the Chamber of Horrors." By 1885, hundreds of American artists had gone to Paris to work amongst the French Impressionists. Some of the American artists remained in France, while others returned to the US, bringing Impressionist thought and technique to the art schools and museums here. Despite initial resistance in America to the Impressionist movement, influential dealers and collectors, as well as the artists themselves, were able to open up the market for this new style of art. Beginning in the 1860s, Paul Durand-Ruel was an important art advocate and a successful French art dealer and gallery owner. He established a relationship with a group of artists who would become known as the French Impressionists. He was one of the first art dealers to provide support to his artists with stipends and solo exhibitions. In 1886, as the originators of the French Impressionist movement were holding their last organized group show in Paris, 310 works in oil and pastel by the French Impressionists were sent to New York City by the Durand Ruel Galleries, bringing their work to New York to help, which helped establish the popularity of Impressionist art in the United States. In 1892, the first one-man show of a French Impressionist held in America was given in Monet's honor at Boston's St. Botolph Club, a club which was founded in 1880 and is still around today. 21 of Monet's works were lent by club members, which proved that Monet had gained an important place in the American collector's conscience, and Impressionism was gaining ground in America. There were many competent American artists within the Impressionist tradition, but it took time for the public to accept their work and those of their followers as anything more than French imitations. By the 1890s, Impressionism was firmly established as a valid style of painting for American artists. The works of the American Impressionists captured the countryside to which urbanites like themselves and their patrons had retreated. As in this painting by Frank Benson, they often depicted women and children in tranquil interiors and gardens that ignored or denied the industrialization taking place behind their walls. Most of the repatriated American Impressionists lived in the Northeast, tapping into the cultural energy that was increasingly concentrated in New York. American Impressionism flourished in art colonies that tended to form in small towns that provided affordable living, abundant scenery for painting, and relatively easy access to large cities where artists could sell their work. There were artist colonies across the country, but tonight we concentrate on East Coast Impressionist artists who were active in art colonies that were located in the Boston area, down through Old Lyme and Coscob, heading out to Shinnecock on eastern Long Island. The 10 American painters shown here were influenced by Impressionism and began resigning from the Society of American Artists in late 1897 to protest the large size and commercialism of the group's exhibitions. The 10, as they were known, held annual exhibitions for 20 years, and eventually the group fell apart as their art was nudged out by urban realism and other movements which came to the group's and the public's attention. Tonight's discussion includes artists who were members of this group, J. Alden Weir, Child Hassam, as well as Twachtman, who died before this photo was taken and was replaced after 1902 by William Merritt Chase. So we begin with Chase, and he was born in Indiana on November 1st, 1849, and was the oldest of 6 children. His father was a shoe merchant and had hoped that Chase would follow him into the shoe business, but at age 18, Chase began his art training with a local portrait painter. After a brief stint in the Navy, the now 20-year-old Chase went to New York to study at the National Academy of Design. And this self-portrait was commissioned for the Richmond Art Museum late in his career. And Chase wrote, "I painted that picture for you people in Richmond. I thought you deserved something good. I have been interested in what you have been doing in the West for art." He further went on to state that the blank canvas in the painting was, quote, "the great picture I am going to paint someday." In 1870, because of family money problems, Chase had to leave New York and moved to St. Louis, where his family had relocated. In 1871, 3 of his paintings, including this one, were exhibited at the National Academy of Design. Chase's talent caught the eye of wealthy St. Louis collectors who asked if he would like to study in Europe with their support. He is said to have replied, "My God, I'd rather go to Europe than go to heaven." They arranged for him to visit Europe for 2 years in exchange for paintings and Chase's help in securing European art for their collections. Chase decided to work in Munich rather than in Paris, not so much for the lesson specifics, but because he thought that the German city would be less distracting. And there, Chase painted figurative works in a style that was popular with his instructors. In January of 1876, this Munich work was exhibited at the Boston Art Club, and later that year, it won a medal at the Philadelphia Centennial Exposition, giving Chase his first taste of fame. Chase returned to New York as a highly skilled artist representing the new wave of European educated American talent. In New York, he exhibited this portrait at the newly formed Society of American Artists. He was a founding member of the society and in 1880 was elected its president. Chase began to teach at the Art Students League, a position he held until 1896, when he opened his own art school in the city. He rebelliously led a small group of progressives who seceded from the Art Students League of New York in search of more individualistic expression. Chase's new art school would educate further luminaries of early American modernism, including Marsden Hartley and Edward Hopper. Originally named the Chase School, it was renamed the New York School of Art 2 years later, and we know it today as the Parsons School of Design. Early in his career, Chase decided that the best way to achieve a high profile and to make money in the art business was to paint portraits. Though he aimed for commissions from high-profile sitters that would lead to further commissions, it is his portraits of friends and family for which he is best known today. His portrait of his student, Dora Wheeler, was awarded honorable mention in the 1883 Paris Salon, and that same year it was awarded the gold medal when shown at the Munich Crystal Palace exhibition. Portraits of fashionable women became his stock in trade, and during the late 1800s, Chase commanded $2,000 for a full-length portrait, a nice hefty sum at the time. Chase traveled abroad continually, but was based in New York, where he had rented a small studio in the 10th Street Studio Building in Greenwich Village. The building opened in 1856 and was the first building in New York, and possibly the first anywhere, erected specifically for artists to work, exhibit, and sell their art. The building's existence signaled that American artists had growing professionalism, and the centralization of American art was now in New York. Chase was undeniably eccentric. He wanted more than a small studio, so he ended up renting the building's exhibition hall, which was transformed into a spectacular two-story skylit studio for him. Chase filled the studio with thousands of items and decorated it in lavish Victorian style. Chase painted his studio more than a dozen times, and this is one of his earliest. We can see that the studio is crammed full of exotic treasures that Chase had collected during his travels. This painting can be seen locally at the Brooklyn Museum and shows a different view of his studio, again, full of treasures. Note in this work how clearly Chase painted the different textures, from the rug on the floor to the silk wall hanging to the brass planter. Chase's use of light reflecting on the planter helps to define it as brass. And here we see Chase at work surrounded by props, holding a palette in his left hand. He is working on a canvas that has already been placed in a frame, a conceit that was common when representing artists in their studios at the time. The loose brushwork featured in this painting suggests the style of Impressionism, which came to characterize Chase's later work. By 1895, the cost of maintaining the studio, in addition to his other residences, forced Chase to close it and auction the contents. Well, backing up a bit, in 1887, Chase married Alice Gerson, who had been his model. And here we see her soon after she had given birth to their first son, sewing baby clothes for, quote, the little one. Chase's focus is not on the well-decorated interior of their home, but is on the effects of the sunlight streaming in, showing his command of plein air painting, even with an indoor subject. By this time, Chase was clearly demonstrating the Impressionist style. Chase and his wife had 8 children in total, all of whom appeared in his portraits and figure studies. This portrait is of their youngest son. Writing in Harper's Weekly, a critic applauded, saying, "Witness the portrait of Roland, who is depicted with splendid brushwork as a rollicking brown rogue, holding in his admirable baby hand the only note of color, a red ball." Chase and his wife moved to his parents' house in Brooklyn, and it was at this time that he first painted nearby Prospect Park. Chase would later paint Central Park when he and his family moved back to Manhattan. For Chase, parks were artful arrangements of eye-pleasing elements. beautiful composites of carefully selected natural objects and architectural features. Interestingly enough, although the parks were considered public, they were not frequented by the working class until the 1890s. Chase's paintings show them as places frequented by genteel ladies and their children. With his series of brilliant images of New York's new public parks, Chase became the first major American artist to create true impressionist canvases in the United States. In 1891, Chase opened the Shinnecock Summer School of Art on Long Island, just west of Southampton. The following year, he moved his family to their nearby newly built summer home. The school became the most important outdoor art school in America. The Southampton lifestyle no doubt appealed to Chase, who was a bit of a social climber. In this painting set in Chase's summer home, we see his wife Alice on the right chatting with her visitor, who is still wearing her hat and gloves. Chase's rendering of light, his easy brushwork, and his choice of everyday subject matter all recall the work of the French Impressionists, but unlike them, Chase carefully composed this painting to underscore abstract elements. Simple rectangular patterns created by, created by vertical and horizontal lines of objects on the wall, of the sofa, and by the floor are contrasted with the more curvilinear figures of the women, the chair, and the pillows. Chase taught at the Shinnecock School 2 days a week until 1902, when the school closed, and for the next several years, he conducted summer classes in different locations in Europe. When Chase wasn't teaching, he spent his time painting and enjoying the company of his family. And this work is characteristic of the outdoor scenes that Chase painted on the beach along Shinnecock Bay. It's a beautiful day with a broad expanse of sky that fills the upper half of the canvas. The clouds echo the bright white forms of the parasol and dresses. Chase's Shinnecock works are excellent examples of American Impressionism and are considered to be among the most beautiful and endearing paintings of life in America at the end of the 19th century. This scene is of Chase's 3 eldest daughters playing among the bayberry bushes and also depicts the Chase summer home in the background designed by Sanford White.
Today, it is no accident in terms of the timing. That reporting coming out
someone has their microphone on. If you could,
I
I think Eleanor, if you can turn off your microphone, thank you very much. Chase is well known for his portraits. His sitters included some of the most important men and women of his time. John Butler Talcott founded the American Hosiery Company in New Britain and was one of New Britain's leading businessmen and civic leaders. And this painting was commissioned by the American Hosiery Company to hang in the company headquarters. Talcott was mayor of New Britain from 1880 to 1882 and a founder and president of the New Britain Institute, the parent institution of the New Britain Museum of American Art, which is where this painting can be found today. In 1903, Talcott made a $20,000 gift of gold bonds to the New Britain Institute to purchase what he called modern oil paintings. Subsequent purchases with advice from New York museums and galleries further defined modern to mean American works of art, now numbering more than 10,000. Now known as the New Britain Museum of American Art, it was the first museum of strictly American art in the country. In addition, as I said, Chase painted his own family. Alice was Chase's eldest child and his favorite model. When asked why, he noted, "I suppose it is because she looks so much like her dear mother." It was at this time that Chase was asked to join the 10 American painters, taking the place of John Twachtman, who we'll talk about in a bit. The Parish Art Museum holds the largest public collection of works by Chase, over 40 paintings and works on paper, and an extensive archive of 1,000 photographs relating to his life and work. And that's where this work can be found. While Chase is most famous for his portraits and his impressionist landscapes, he painted still lifes throughout his career. And surprisingly, Chase's most famous still life subject was dead fish. Chase often staged his paintings of fish still lifes as a demonstration or performance for his students. Chase painted quickly, identifying the brightest section at the outset, then worked in the dark and light areas. Chase's goal seems to have been to make what he called an uninteresting subject so inviting and entertaining by means of fine technique that people will be charmed at the way you've done it. So I'm not sure if you find the fish charming or not. Chase's large-scale paintings of fish done with a somber Munich-inspired palette sold for between $1,000 and $2,000 each. These helped pay the bills, but Chase worried that he would be known to future generations only as a painter of fish. Well, he needn't have worried. Chase's creativity declined in his later years, especially as modern art took hold in America, but he continued to paint and teach into the 1910s. In 1914, he was invited to teach a summer class in Carmel in California. During that summer, he visited nearby Monterey, where he painted this work. Chase died in his New York townhouse on October 25th, 1916, at the age of 66, and was buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. Chase was a gifted artist who created a distinct account of his time and place. Today, his works are in most major museums in the United States, and his home and studio at Shinnecock Hills are on the National Register of Historic Places as the William Merritt Chase Homestead. Our next artist is John Henry Twachtman. He may well be the most gifted, original, and innovative of all the American Impressionists, but he is relatively unknown today. I'm not sure how many of you knew his name. Only in recent years has this talented artist begun to receive the widespread recognition he deserves. Art historians consider Twachtman's style of American Impressionism to be among the more personal and experimental of his generation. Twachtman was born on August 4th, 1853 in Cincinnati. His first artistic efforts were painting floral window shades for his father's business during the day while spending his evenings training at the Ohio Mechanics Institute. In 1874, he studied at the Cincinnati School of Design before going the following year to Munich again, where he studied at the Royal Academy. Twachtman returned to Cincinnati, where he married Martha Scudder, who was an amateur artist. They honeymooned in Europe, where he painted in Belgium and Holland with a new friend, artist J. Alden Weir, who we're also going to talk about in a little bit. This springtime scene shows Martha and their children on a terrace bordered by flowers and bathed in soft light. Martha rocks her newborn son, interestingly named J. Alden Twachtman, while their daughters play by her side, and the Twachtmans went on to have a total of 7 children. Dissatisfied with his work and its public reception, and fed up in general with, unfortunately, Cincinnati, Twachtman complained to Weir that, quote, "a good many people, all of them supposed to be up on art matters, have seen my paintings, but I am convinced they care little for them. This is a very old, fogied place. There is no good art influence here, and I shall be glad to leave." Opting once more for Europe, Twachtman studied for 2 years at the Académie Julienne in Paris, determined to improve his drawing and further develop his style. A series of personal, poetic French landscapes culminated in this serene and monumental painting, in which the elegant treatment of the reeds silhouetted in the foreground reflects the influence of Japanese prints. As you may know, the French Impressionists collected Japanese art and were significantly influenced by it. If you have ever been to Monet's Giverny, you will know that his house is filled with Japanese prints. Awash in greens and silver tones, this large canvas was turned down by the Paris Salon, but has come to be the most admired of Twachtman's early paintings. It was purchased in 1968 by the Met, and it's easy to see in New York. Twachtman ended his studies in Paris and returned to America at the age of 32. Once home, he faced a period of significant economic hardship. He traveled widely looking for support, painted with Weir on his Connecticut farm, and even joined a crew to paint a large cyclorama in Chicago. Twachtman eventually settled in Connecticut on 17 acres of land on Round Hill Road in Greenwich. On the property was a farmhouse, which the Twachtmans steadily enlarged over the coming years. And here he continued to develop his own impressionist manner, and he painted the bulk of his work. The majority of his finest works were completed during this period. In this work, Twachtman uses linear perspective to lead our eyes directly to the house. The land, the waterfall, brook, ponds, as well as the farmhouse would all be the subject of many of Twachtman's best-known paintings. Besides the farmhouse and the land surrounding it, Twachtman made dozens of paintings of this small waterfall on his property. He emphasized the solidity and rich colors of the surrounding rocks and the force of the flowing water with broad, smoothly applied brushstrokes. Today, although additional houses have been built nearby, the waterfall looks much as it did when Twachtman immortalized it a century ago. Unlike other artists, such as his friends Childe Hassam and J. Alden Weir, Twachtman lived in Greenwich all year round and commuted to New York to teach at the Art Students League and the Cooper Institute. In addition, he supported himself by working as an illustrator for Scribner's magazine and by teaching plein air painting at Newport and Cascade in the summers. Perhaps because of financial problems, Twachtman spent the winters of 1900 and 1901 at the Holly House, a boarding house frequented by artists and writers in Cascade, adjacent to Greenwich. And here is an early ad for the Holly boarding house from 1885, which includes offering large rooms, fresh vegetables, shade, 1 minute from boating, bathing, and fishing. For artists desiring to leave their studios and paint en plein air, like some of the French were now doing, Cascade and Holly House became the center for students seeking accommodations. At the Holly House, Twachtman socialized with artist friends like Hassam and Weir. They engaged in spirited debates, charades, and games at night. And during the day, Twachtman diligently painted buildings around the village, and particularly the old house itself. As seen in this painting, Twachtman was especially fond of winter landscapes. He explained to a fellow artist, "We must have snow and lots of it. Never is nature more lovely than when it is snowing. Everything is so quiet and the whole earth seems wrapped in a mantle. All nature is hushed to silence." Twachtman painted several different views from the front porch of Holly House looking across the Mianus River, a scene now marred by the jarring presence of an elevated span of I-95. He also created affectionate profiles of the house in all seasons. As we saw, Twachtman showed it covered in snow. And here in October, he depicted it along with the neighboring store surrounded by fall foliage. The unifying factor in this painting is that all the colors are nearly the same value. It appears to have been painted during the brightest part of the day so that the colors seem almost washed out or faded. Today, the structure is known as the Bush Holly Historic Site and is open to the public, filled with works of art and memorabilia of the Cascade Art Gallery. It's well worth a visit. I'll give you a little hint in a minute about why you should go. Around the turn of the century, Twachtman began summering in the picturesque fishing village of Gloucester, Massachusetts, and produced a series of vibrant scenes that anticipated a more modernist style that had yet to gain prominence in American art. Just after his 49th birthday, as his art seemed to be taking off in new and promising directions, Twachtman died suddenly of a brain aneurysm in Gloucester in the summer of 1902. He was buried under a simple headstone in Gloucester's Oak Grove Cemetery. And as I alluded to, for those of you who would like to know more about Twachtman, the Greenwich Historical Society is hosting an exhibition at the Bush Holly House of Twachtman's work. And this show runs now through January 22nd. And you can check their website for specifics on days and times. So we've mentioned Twachtman's friendship with J. Alden Weir, including that he named one of his sons J. Alden. So we move on to our next artist now, J. Alden Weir, known as J. Alden. He's Julian Alden Weir. He was born on August 30th in 1852 at West Point, New York. And he was the 14th of 16 children. There were some large families. From the beginning, Weir showed an interest in art, one that was not surprising, given that many of his family members were artists. Weir's father was a prominent painter of portraits and historical subjects and was a professor of drawing at the U.S. Military Academy. Weir's older brother, John Ferguson Weir, was a well-known painter and had been appointed as the first director of the Yale School of Fine Arts in 1869. Weir's family offered him encouragement in his own career as a painter, and at age 17, he enrolled first in art classes at the National Academy of Design. Then from 1873 to 77, he studied in Europe, mainly in Paris at the École des Beaux-Arts. He had been sent off with the blessing of his father, who told him, "Don't return, old boy, until your veins flow with the rich mother's milk of art. Fatten on it, and then let your own genius ripen with the experience of it." Weir's 4 years in Europe were exactly the intense experience with art that his father had wanted for his son. Weir studied art and traveled extensively and wrote to his brother, "A man could afford to starve for the sake of seeing these great wonders." This painting is an early work by Weir, which he painted in the fall of 1876 after returning to Paris following a trip to Spain. We are looking at people who have gathered at a water fountain to exchange news while taking a rest from their daily chores, and this would have been a common sight in Spain at that time, as indoor plumbing was not yet widespread. When Weir left Paris in 1877, he returned to New York City and established himself as a portrait and still life painter. Beginning in 1878, Weir taught at Cooper Union and then for 20 years at the Art Students League. Later, he would help found the 10 American painters that we talked about before, that formed to exhibit their own works separate from the rigid standards of the Academy. To support himself, Weir took on portrait commissions, but there were few commissions to be had. As a consequence, he often used his own family as models, and here, this is his sister. Weir also took on the role of art buyer and collector and took trips to Europe, partly to study and partly to buy art for New York collectors. Weir bought a painting for $560. Irwin Davis, a New York art collector, took one look at the painting and offered Weir a 153-acre farm in the Branchville section of Western Connecticut in exchange. Weir liked the property and agreed to the trade. So in 1882, for a painting and $10, Weir received the Branchville farm. The identity of the painting that was traded for the property is unknown. We've tried so many times to find it, but it is unknown. The property was located on Nod Hill, and Weir and his artist friends nicknamed the property the Land of Nod and used the phrase to title works that were inspired by the local landscape. From that swap was born the Weir Farm National Historic Site in Branchville on the Ridgefield-Wilton line. And Weir Farm is the only historic site of its kind in the state and its only national park, and it became a cradle of American Impressionism. It was in the same year that Weir got married. One of Weir's pupils brought a friend with her to a drawing lesson, and the new student was Anna Dwight Baker from Windham, Connecticut. Within 3 weeks, Weir and Anna fell in love and became engaged, and they were married in April of the following year. After a 6-month honeymoon in Europe, a nice honeymoon, they returned to the United States. Anna and Julian had 4 children together, 3 of whom survived to adulthood. Caroline was born soon after the couple returned from their honeymoon. Their son, Julian Alden Weir Jr., unfortunately died in infancy. Dorothy and Cora were the youngest daughters, born in 1890 and 92, respectively. They split their time between quiet summers in Branchville and Windham, and then Weir's professional life in New York City. But sadly, just a week after their youngest child's birth, his wife Anna died suddenly. Shattered, Weir handled the tragedy by leaving Branchville and spending several months in Chicago, where he immersed himself in painting murals. His wife's sister, Ella, was available to take charge of the children while Weir was away, and letters between Weir and his sister-in-law show his gradual realization that Ella could fill the void in his life, and they were married in Boston in October of 1893. Idle Hours was completed in 1888 and exhibited that year at the 4th Annual Prize Fund exhibition in New York, where it earned the $2,000 prize. Depicted is Weir's wife, Anna, and their first child, Caroline. They are seated in a large sunny room of their home. Notable is the informal leisure time subjects, as well as Weir's emphasis on the effects of light especially the bright glow filtering through the curtains and the resulting shadowed faces. Note also that Weir has balanced these two unequal figures, that of his wife and daughter, by placing them in a triangular composition, and he has used the guitar to follow the lines of the triangle and to visually separate the white of their two dresses. This pastoral landscape reveals Weir at his most impressionistic. This painting appears at first glance to be a serene view of nature, but a red-orange accent in the central background brings the viewer's eye to that factory chimney. Its vertical form links it both to the trees and to the pole protruding from a haystack in the upper right, linking it to both nature and agriculture. Between 1893 and 1897, Weir painted several views of the textile factories in Willimantic, Connecticut. While it is not certain that this painting depicts Willimantic, it demonstrates the idealization of the New England factory village that is characteristic of those works. More than in any factory painting, here Weir softened the industrial reality by keeping it at a distance and linking it formally with the countryside. At a time when Americans worried that the price of industrial progress might be the loss of natural beauty and agrarian values, Weir painted visual reassurances that America could reconcile tradition and change. Here, Weir captured the severe industrial form of a new iron truss bridge covered with red priming paint over the Shetucket River in Windham. The image of the bridge is reflected at the bottom in the water. The red of the bridge stands out against the delicate greens and blues of nature. The red color marks the bridge as a symbol of technology that seems out of place. Weir showed this painting at numerous exhibitions in the early 20th century, including the massive show of the 10 at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in 1908. The painting remained in Weir's possession until at least 1910. It was not signed until 1914 when it was presented to the Met, and it is considered Weir's most famous work. Like Monet's beloved Giverny, Weir's farm was an enduring source of inspiration. He added a fishing pond in 1896, and in 1907, he acquired a neighboring farm, bringing his property to a total of 238 acres. Weir also expanded the original farmhouse twice, giving him more space to host his friends. Many artists spent weekends there fishing, hunting, drinking homemade cider, discussing philosophy, and of course, painting. This work sums up Weir's mature approach to landscape painting, in which he used bold pictorial effects to capture both a visual impression and his intense feelings about nature. This painting is of the small village of Windham, where Weir's wives grew up. At the time it was done, Weir and many of his friends exhibited in the Armory Show of 1913, an international show of over 300 artists that boasted the largest attendance of an art exhibition in New York. Over 100,000 people attended and were introduced to new, quote, modern artists like Duchamp and Picasso. With the success of the show, Weir said that, quote, "These young artists are getting at the real thing. They are the ones to watch. Our work is a thing done." Weir died from heart disease on December 8th, 1919, at the age of 67. During his illness, Weir found comfort at his farm, where he would sit on the porch, observe the farm's natural beauty, and reflect on his full life. Weir wrote, "Really, I know not what I am best at. I believe I am a fisherman, dreamer, and lover of nature. And if I lived to be 120, I might become an artist." So we finish with Childe Hassam, who was a pioneer of American Impressionism, a founding member of the 10 American painters. Hassam was instrumental in promoting Impressionism to American collectors, dealers, and museums. He became the foremost chronicler of New York City at the turn of the century. Hassam was born in Dorchester, Massachusetts on October 17, 1859. His father was a cutlery merchant and took little notice of his son's budding artistic talent. A fire, unfortunately, in 1872, wiped out his father's business. To help out, Hassan dropped out of high school and took an accounting job. However, his poor aptitude for figures convinced his father to allow him to pursue an art career, and Hassan found employment with a wood engraver and proved a talented draftsman. By 1882, Hassan was exhibiting publicly and had his first solo exhibition of watercolors at the Williams and Everett Gallery in Boston. Having had relatively little formal art training, Hassan was advised by his friend and fellow Boston Art Club member Edmund Garrett to take a study trip with him to Europe during the summer of 1883. And this is one of the 67 watercolors Hassan did on that trip. Here we can clearly see the use of a vanishing point leading down the pathway, mirrored by the receding line of the fence. The line where the water meets the sidewalk divides the painting almost vertically in half, and the horizon again divides the painting horizontally in half. These two lines lead the eye around the canvas and draw it to the center as a focal point, and they also act to balance the composition. In 1884, Hassan married Kathleen Maud Doan, and they had no children. She was Hassan's model in a few of his paintings from the 1910s. Early in their marriage, they lived in Boston, where Hassan began painting cityscapes, this painting being one of his first. Despite the old-fashioned charm this painting presents to viewers today, in Hassan's time, this scene was distinctly modern. Hassan enhanced his impression of the fast pace of city life by using a perspective scheme in which the vertical lines of the fence, the lampposts, and the trees recede rapidly into the distance, coming closer and closer together. Hassan contrasted the hurried movement at left with the calm quiet of the snowy park on the right. In fact, if you look at each side of this painting separately, they could be two totally different works. Wanting to continue his art education, Hassan decided to return for a second time to Paris in 1886, and he brought his wife. There, Hassan studied at the Académie Julienne, receiving instruction based on traditional figure drawing. With this work, Hassan incorporated the Impressionist style he saw in Paris into his artistic vocabulary. The Grand Prix was the final race in the spring season, held at the Longchamp track in the Bois de Boulogne. The Grand Prix signaled the closing of the society season before summer vacations. The brilliant sunlight and small shadows in Hassan's painting indicated time shortly after noon, the hour that racegoers came to the track. There, people like those Hassan depicts here would spend the early afternoon picnicking, sipping champagne, enjoying each other's company, eyeing one another's costumes, and of course, placing bets. The races at Longchamp has earlier been portrayed by French Impressionists Degas and Manet, who depicts the jockeys and spectators at the track. The New Britain Museum's painting is closely related to a study of the same scene in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Done earlier, the Boston study is smaller in scale and is a bit more subdued in color. Hassan said that colleagues who had seen his study urged him to paint it larger. "I hope I shall do it as well as the smaller one, which I thought was successful in some ways," he said. Hassan made few changes to the composition, but brightened the palette and loosened his brushwork. The carefully calculated results marked his first decisive foray into Impressionism. In Paris, the Hassans lived among the French and didn't really socialize with other American artists studying abroad. Hassan's first Parisian works were street and horse scenes, and he sent them back to Boston for sale, which, combined with older watercolors, provided them with sufficient income to sustain their stay abroad. The Hassans returned to America in 1889 and settled in New York City, then the art capital of the US, to get nearer to important artists, dealers, and collectors. From 1889 to 1895, Hassan worked in a studio at 95 Fifth Avenue, not far from Union Square. And this painting shows a view of the square from a high standpoint, looking south from the corner of 17th Street and Broadway. In the background, the Hotel Morton House is seen on the left, and across from it on the right is the domed building of the Domestic Sewing Machine Company. Barely visible between them is the spire of Grace Church at 10th Street. When Hassan painted this scene, the center of New York City was still south of 34th Street. Union Square Park was a destination for entertainment and shopping. The challenge for the urban impressionists was that activity moved very quickly, and getting down a complete impression in oil was next to impossible. To adapt to this, Hassan would find a suitable location, make sketches of the components of his planned painting, then return to the studio to construct a total impression, which was in actuality a composite of smaller scenes. Hassan painted what struck his fancy from New York City to the Isle of Shoals off the coast of Maine. He worked and relaxed on an island called Appledore, a popular gathering place for artists. He stayed with his friend, the poet Celia Thaxter, who helped her family manage a hotel there. And social life on the island revolved around her salon. Artists displayed their work there and were exposed to wealthy buyers staying on the island. Hassan often painted the garden that Thaxter had planted outside her cottage. She had deliberately designed her garden to look as if it grew wild by the sea. The flowers include red poppies, blue larkspur, white lilies, and purple hollyhocks. This is a close-up, and the flowers cover most of the canvas. Past them is the brilliant blue ocean, sun-drenched rocks, and a pale summer sky. Absolutely peaceful, beautiful painting. Hassan had his first major one-man exhibition in 1896, featuring over 200 works. The New York Times observed that of the, quote, steadily increasing band of impressionists, Mr. Hassan is a priest high in the councils. Still, Hassan realized less than $50 per painting. Other American artists were also having a difficult time during the general economic slump of 1896, and Hassan decided to leave the depressing scene behind, and he and his wife returned to Europe. They arrived in Paris in the spring and then traveled on to England before returning to the States. Back in New York in 1897, Hassan took part in forming the 10, the group that we've been talking about. He was among the most radical of its members. During continued trips up and down the East Coast, Hassan was a frequent visitor to Greenwich. He boarded at the Bush Holly House in Cos Cob, and this painting was done during a stay there. He used short, choppy brushstrokes that go in every direction, and the result is that the air sparkles and the water appears to flow. Up the coast in Old Lyme, Hassan would often stay at Florence Griswold's boarding house, home of the Lyme Art Colony and now the Florence Griswold Museum. His charm and easy manner made him a favorite of Miss Florence, as Griswold was affectionately known. There he painted some of his most charming depictions of the churches, homes, and tree-lined streets of an old New England village, as well as many landscapes of the surrounding area. When looking at this painting, one is reminded of childhood memories lying on the grass and staring at the sky, letting our minds wander while the clouds take on different shapes. And here a large cloud resembles a mythical dragon, and it dominates the scene. As the new century began, some 3 decades after the Impressionists' first exhibition in France, Impressionism finally gained a legitimacy in American art community, and Hassan began to sell to major museums and receive jury awards and medals. By 1909, Hassan was enjoying great success, now earning as much as $6,000 per painting. The Hassans returned to Paris in 1910, but found that it had changed. Hassan had left New York because he felt that the urbanization and industrialization there had tainted the city's visual and personal appeal. He now also saw Paris as a noisy, dirty city with too much new construction taking place, tarnishing its old nature. Well, Hassan painted this work, a depiction of Paris covered in flags for the 14th of July, or Bastille Day, which, as you know, is a celebration of the beginning of the French Revolution. Even though he had become exasperated with Paris, Hassan was still able to be inspired by the many flags hanging from Parisian buildings in patriotic display. And shortly after this work was completed, the Hassans returned to New York. Hassan then began a series of window paintings, which he continued until the 1920s. And here the model was the daughter of Toby, who owned Toby's Tavern next to the Bush Holly House. The kimono she is wearing may have been a studio prop of Hassan's, for other figures in the series wear similar robes. The robe reflects the general taste of the time for Oriental elegance when women dressed up in kimonos, practiced flower arranging, and participated in tea ceremonies. Hassan painted the last of the window series around 1910. The scenes had been an important source of income and critical acclaim for him, winning prizes and selling quickly, and quite a number of them became very popular with museums. The most distinctive and famous works of Hassan's later life compose a set of about 30 paintings known as the Flag series, which he began in 1916. Hassan's flag paintings cover all seasons and various weather and light conditions. He had hoped that the entire series would sell as a war memorial set, but the paintings were actually sold individually after several group exhibitions. Hassan was inspired here by a preparedness parade for the American involvement in World War I. It was held on Fifth Avenue, which had been renamed the Avenue of the Allies. Thousands participated in these parades, which often lasted for over 12 hours. This painting depicts part of the most ambitious flag display in support of the Fourth Liberty Loan Drive. These colorful flags were meant to encourage patriotic spirit and raise money to pay for wartime expenses. And here Hassan looked north from 53rd Street and transformed 3 city blocks of flags into a very colorful pattern. In 1919, Hassan and his wife purchased a house in East Hampton and made it their summer headquarters. There he was very productive, and he returned to New York with a large group of paintings ready for sale. Hassan devoted the last decade of his life largely to printmaking, and here massive elms cast looming vein-like shadows onto the late 18th century manor house named for a distinguished early settler of East Hampton. The post-war art market boomed in the 1920s, and Hassan commanded escalating prices, though some critics thought he had become static and repetitive, as American art had begun to move on to the Ashcan School and artists like Edward Hopper. Hassan died in East Hampton on August 27, 1935, at the age of 75. He had created more than 2,000 oils, watercolors, pastels, and illustrations, and after 1912, more than 400 etchings and other prints. Shortly before his death, he arranged to bequeath all the paintings remaining in his studio to the American Academy of Arts and Letters. According to his wish, they were sold to establish a fund for the purchase of American works to be donated to museums. So now that we've highlighted the lives and works of 4 American Impressionists, we thought, as you're probably wondering, it would be interesting to do a short comparison of the American Impressionists to the French, and what could be more interesting than to compare the prices their works command in the art market. The French Impressionists tend to be very familiar in name and work, but we're guessing that many of you either hadn't heard of some of the artists we spoke about today, or were certainly less familiar with their works. And the art buying public is the same way. While French Impressionist works are sold for millions, American Impressionist works are relatively inexpensive. For example, in 1990, this version of Renoir's Bal au Moulin de la Galette sold for $78 million. And in 2008, Monet's Le Bassin aux Nymphes sold for over $80 million. By contrast, in 2012, J. Alden Weir's The Mother sold for $22,500. And earlier in 2007, Twachtman's Hemlock sold for $600,000. Of the American Impressionists that we've discussed, only Chase and Hassan command prices in the millions. Bill Gates, an avid art collector, owns Chase's The Nursery, which he bought for $10 million, and Hassan's Room of Flowers, which he purchased for $20 million. And clearly these are expensive paintings, but are really only a quarter of the price of the elite French Impressionist works. But they do keep gaining in value, and keep your eyes out, we always say, at those tag sales. So thank you for joining us. If you would like a list of where some of the works mentioned in this lecture can be found within driving distance, please email us at info@artscapades.com. Please include which lecture you were asking for. This one was, as you know, American Impressionism. We will be back on Wednesday, February 1st with a lecture titled The Civil War in Art, From Conflict to Aftermath. Dates for all our lectures can be found on our website. Remember to like us on Facebook. I'm going to stop sharing.
Jody, that was wonderful. We had a few questions which I've answered. One was, who was Florence Griswold and what was her connection to the American Impressionists? And she ran a boarding house and she was very supportive of the artists. If you have not been to the Florence Griswold Museum, it is really worth a visit. The dining room there alone has all these panels that the Impressionists were asked to paint on, and they're still there today. It's really a fabulous place. J. Alden Weir's house is another place that, and the Bush Holly, of course, to see the Twachtman. Twachtman was one of the 10. Just that photo is a little bit misleading.
Right. He died before that picture was taken.
And Chase replaced him as one of the 10. So good questions, very good questions, and hard to keep it all going because there's so many artists that we talk about.
Luckily, there's no quiz.
To unmute themselves and ask another question. We'd be happy to discuss anything. Any questions, comments?
Did you know all these artists? Was anybody a new artist that you hadn't heard of? And have you been to the Weir home? Have you been to the Holly House?
Yeah.
I hope I'm going to take advantage and go see some of Twachtman's works hanging there. I love Twachtman's white on white paintings.
Yeah.
I've been to the Griswold Museum and it is very nice.
Isn't
It is.
wonderful?
It's a
Dining
lovely
room alone.
homestead to walk around. There's wonderful tidbits inside, carvings on doors and things. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah. And the Bush Holly House, as Jody mentioned, does have the Twachtman exhibit up through January. So that would be wonderful to go and see that, to just sort of add into the story of the house itself. And there were so many other artists that worked there too. So it's good. Yeah.
I didn't know that the New Britain Museum was the first American art museum, and that's a wonderful resource in Connecticut.
It's a beautiful
lovely
museum also. If anybody has a chance to take that drive, it's a beautiful museum. Lovely to spend time there. Very modern and fun to look at.
Right. Very interesting.
Where Florence Griswold is an old homestead, it's so they're really a contrast, but they're not that far from each other if you have a long day.
But Mary Kay, did you get up there after it was renovated? Because I know Jody and I tried to go years ago, and it was under renovation, and then we got back there after it had been renovated. And I don't know how many years ago that was, but it really is a wonderful space.
It's got to be now at least 10 years ago, I would think.
Yeah, I have been there since it was renovated, and I've been to the Florence Griswold since they put in the separate building with the modern pieces.
Yeah.
So that's a really good contrast to the real depth of the American Impressionist paintings that they have in the homestead and her home boarding house, and then the new building and the new art there.
Yeah, and the J. Alden Weir house has also been redone a few years ago, which is wonderful if you haven't been there, but you probably have. I'm going to guess you have been there.
And hiked. Then it's a wonderful place to
That's
hike.
a lovely place to walk around too. Yeah, we're very lucky
Absolutely.
in this area to have so many American Impressionist venues, which is really a lot of fun. And you can see why people go up and paint there at Weir Farm. It's really fantastic. So it's great.
Has anyone been to the Holly House to see it in general? We used to take kids there. It was fun.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was really a lot of fun. And it's really nice for us because it is so much that's in this area. So this and the Hudson River School is sort of the two that are kind of fun to do because you can run out and see all the places locally. So Thanks so much for coming. Everybody have a wonderful
Yeah, at
Thanksgiving.
this point, we're gonna say, Happy New Year, right?
Holiday and everything,
We're gonna
exactly.
see, it's so hard to believe we're in November and we're
I
gonna see you
know.
next year, right?
Thank you both. This is
Everyone stay
Thank
well.
you so much, Cindy. Thank you so much for having us.
Look forward to the
So
next.
hard to believe it's gonna be next year.
I know, true.
All
right,
right, everyone take
take care.
care. Stay well.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.